voters in Ontario may have a better idea this morning of just who will get their vote on June the 2nd. That's at the culmination of the televised debate last night among leaders of the four main parties. They sparred for 90 minutes, prime time, and yes, there were some fiery exchanges.
You destroyed this province. The economy was going downhill quicker than the Canadian bobsled team. It just continued going down.
He will roll out the red carpets for the Amazons of the world and the big box stores of the world. But when it comes to supporting local farmers, he'll pave over their farmland.
You've lost touch. You're out of touch with the hardworking men and women.
I think you need to look in the mirror, Mr. Ford.
He's here tonight bragging like he deserves a medal or a pat on the back about supporting public education. Your record on public education, Mr. Ford, is an embarrassment.
Some of the key exchanges from last night. Let's bring in our Ontario legislative reporter, Mike Crawley, normally at Queen's Park, but with us this morning in studio. And great to see you on this, Mike, because you were following very closely, listening to what they had to say, gathering some of the reaction this morning. But I'm interested, first of all, what stood out for last night for you?
I think a couple of things, Heather. First of all, the debate format actually was pretty good. The moderators allowed the leaders to present their platforms, to talk, allow people to kind of get a bit of a feel for the leaders. I mean, that's really what a lot of these debates are supposed to be about. And we had a chance to do that. There were some good one-on-one exchanges, and then the moderators, clamped down on them when things got a little bit chaotic. The other thing that stood out for me was Mike Schreiner, the Green Party leader. In some ways, he's the guy who had the least to lose in this debate, and he really sees the opportunity. In particular, there was one moment when Doug Ford was talking about nurses and defending his government's record towards nurses and describing what his government was doing as, quote, taking care of nurses. Here's how Mike Schreiner responded to that.
Mr. Ford, have you talked to a nurse lately? Exactly. Have you talked to a nurse about how disrespected they feel, how overworked and underpaid and underappreciated they are, how insulted they feel being called heroes and then essentially having their wages cut by having them frozen?
And right after that moment, Heather, there was a split screen in the debate, and we could actually see the expression on Doug Ford's face. He's not used to handling Mike Schreiner, the Green Party leader, as much as he is with the New Democrat and Liberal leaders, and it was almost as if he'd been disarmed.
So overall, what did you think of Ford's performance? I mean, everybody focusing on him as the premier of the last government, his performance, and Andrea Horwath as well, NDP leader. Lots of attention to sort of set up as a bit of a battle for second place here, given what the polls are telling us. Yeah,
so these folks all had different things that they needed to accomplish. So Doug Ford did not need to win last night's debate. He just needed not to lose it. And to do that, he needed to, not get too engaged in taking the bait, from the opposition leaders, not get too riled up or, say anything that made him come across as angry or petulant. He mostly accomplished that, but there were a couple of moments in which the other leaders managed to get under his skin a bit. In particular, at this point in time when Stephen Del Duca, the Liberal leader, was challenging Doug Ford on how his government had handled COVID-19.
For 2.5 years, literally 24/7, I was working on this pandemic. It's easy to sit back from the sidelines when you didn't have to make the tough decisions that I had to make and criticize. You have the easiest job if you just sit there and criticize.
Mr. Ford, respectfully, Mr. Ford, this is the job that you signed up for 4 years ago. You asked for people to support you 4 years ago. You ran to be premier. You must accept responsibility.
Very good. You've both made your points.
I got a little messy there at the end, but Stephen Del Duca, the Liberal leader, really needed last night to be a turning point in this campaign. We're about at the midway point, and he needed to present himself and the Liberals as the only party that can defeat Doug Ford, to try to appeal to what you could call the anti-Ford voters, try and eat away a little bit at the NDP and start to close the gap on Doug Ford. And to do that, his advisors had told me ahead of time that we would see him go after Doug Ford a little more directly, because a criticism of Stephen Del Duca has been that he hasn't showed a lot of passion at times. He's pretty calm, cool, and collected sort of guy, but that sometimes comes across as, not particularly fired up. So he got a little more fired up last night. Andrea Horwath of the NDP, she had a similar, let's say, mission, again, to persuade Ontarians that only the NDP can defeat Doug Ford and the Conservatives. But she ended up diluting her message to some extent because she spent a lot of time going after Stephen Del Duca instead of going after Doug Ford. Here's an example of that.
I'm sorry, you left a wreck behind you,
Listen,
and you have to step up and take some responsibility
there
for
are
that,
new
Mr.
challenges.
Del Duca.
There are new challenges.
Where were
facing
you
the
when all
people.
these decisions
There are
were
new
being made? Were you out
facing-
getting a coffee?
Now, Stephen Del Duca pretty much tried to ignore Andrea Horwath through much of the debate, Heather.
So as Ontario voters then, Mike, contemplate what they saw and heard last night and look ahead to these final campaign weeks and voting day on the 2nd of June, is this likely to change any voter selection?
A lot of public opinion is really baked in right now. I mean, from what I've heard from the pollsters, people who are in favor of Doug Ford are quite, strongly insistent that they're, going to vote for him. So what really matters is what happens in that second place battle. Do the Liberals start to open up a bit of a gap, a bigger gap between them and the NDP, and really try to turn this into a two-horse race? So that's what I'll be looking to see in the polls that come out immediately after the debate.